slightly older than that.
Let part hairs there. We'll say 33. You look great. And you are also our renters and mortgage expert over here. Everybody in our group, all our activist friends know when it comes down to the skinny, if you have an issue with evictions, you have to talk to Elena Popp because she's the one who can give you the insight. Now, it's been 3 months since COVID has rocked the country and we've all been on lockdown. We really didn't receive any rent cancellation. We did get a rent freeze, which means they can't raise the rent. We didn't get a real moratorium, but right now this can has been kicked down the road. Where do we stand in the next several months when it comes to renters who are looking for that help? Is that help going to come on the way, or are they going to be just stuck out in the cold?
Well, we're still working on rent cancellation. We're working on a lot of policies to that end, but I think it's important to talk about where we are right now and how we got here. So a third of 17 million households did not pay their rent in April. In LA County alone, that would have been 600,000 people who did not pay the rent. So we were expecting 600,000 evictions in April in LA County. In one court alone, that would have been 55,000 evictions. And the number of evictions we got in that court, do you want to guess or should I tell you?
You tell us.
33 instead of 55,000. The reason that happened is that we had a very important policy change that came to us from our state judicial council. The judicial council, the highest judicial body in the state, told landlords, okay, you're going to file evictions, file them, but we are not going to give you a summons. The summons is the paper that gives the court power over the tenant. Without a summons, there can't be a trial. There can't be a writ of possession. There can't be a writ of execution telling the sheriff to kick you out. They basically can't be an eviction. And there's no summonses being issued until 90 days after the governor lifts the state of emergency. A very significant pause that basically stopped an eviction tsunami. And that, I would say, is tsunami number one. And that for that, we're very grateful. And we've been making good use of the time working to stop tsunami number two as well.
Wow. That's incredible. I think we were expecting a lot more.
Well, how did the 33 people get evicted? I mean, how do they do that if they can't open up the courts?
So they didn't get eviction. They filed 33 cases were filed. 2 of them were non-payment of rent cases. So those are, no eviction summons can be issued on those. And a smattering of them were based on the one exception to getting a summons. You could get a summons if your tenant is such a violent nuisance that they are presenting a health and safety danger. So one lawyer tried to get one for someone who refused fumigation, and the court said, nah, that's not what they meant. There are a couple of other examples like that. So nobody's been evicted. None of those cases have moved forward, but only 33 out of a potential 55,000 in just the one court where we have stats. So it could have been 600,000 in the county. And roughly, I would say I'd be exaggerating if 40 evictions were filed in the entire county.
That's crazy. But what about when the 90 days is lifted? What's going to happen to all the renters out there that didn't get the cancellation? They only got a minimal deferment, right? And that deferment may be spread out over 6 months. But if you got to pay 3 months of rent tacked on to your original rent, which everybody has a hard time paying, what's going to happen to those people? Is there anything coming down the pipeline for them, or are they just going to be sink or swim?
Well, we're still working on the pipeline. So let me answer the pipeline question. So we've been pushing for canceling rents and canceling mortgages, and we're not quite winning that battle yet. That battle is happening on 2 fronts. On the state front, with the state assembly and the governor, and on the federal fund with 2 bills. Talking about the federal fund front, there's the Omar bill and there's a Waters bill. And both of those are being, lobbied, improved, changes, pushed, and we're not sure what's going to happen with those. On the state level, we also are working it. There is a rent strike, the hashtag of which is cancel rents. So hashtag cancel rents, hashtag cancel mortgages. And where we are with that is, you issue a rent strike and then some negotiations start happening. So right now, there are 2 bills on the state level that offer some potential relief. One of them would prohibit a landlord from filing an eviction for COVID-related non-payment. So no eviction can be filed, but you're still stuck with this debt, right?
Yeah.
And so that could be okay if it doesn't affect your credit. It could be okay if they can't garnish your wages. So we're still kind of working out the details of that one, but at least your housing's not at risk. The other one would the state would buy out the debt, and the tenant would owe the debt to the landlord, to the state, and would have 10 years interest-free to pay it back. That's a little bit more appealing. Still not straight out cancellation, but those are the long-term solutions. But first, we haven't got that, right? We're not there yet. And secondly, day 91 is going to come. So for day 91, what we are doing in LA County, and we hope this will become a model throughout the state, is educating landlords and tenants on what the protections are now so that landlords will not file eviction actions. If a landlord files a COVID-19 related action based on non-payment of rent, in LA County, tenants will have 12 months to pay the rent. I know in Pasadena, it's only 6 months right now, but we are about to invalidate your Pasadena law in favor of a stronger county law. The Board of Supervisors is working towards looking at invalidating any law in LA County that is not as strong as what they have passed. And one of the criteria for determining strength is you have to have 12 months to repay. So because of that, I am very confident that tenants in LA County will have 12 months to repay. We need to fight for that for tenants all over the state, but 12 months to repay, which then kicks that can down the road 12 months. If we do the same kind of education of landlords and tenants, for tenants, the message is can't pay your rent, don't panic, don't worry, don't settle. Don't sign, don't move, because we're working on a long-term permanent solution. For landlords is don't let those landlord lawyers who are hungry right now because they haven't been able to evict anyone talk you into filing an eviction action that you can't win because your tenant has a COVID-19 related reason for not paying the rent. So you can't win. Plus, once you're in eviction, you can't collect any rent, even though your tenant now has the money because they went back to work. You can't collect the future rent either. And you know what? There's 600,000 of these cases. It's going to take 3 years to get through them. So don't be stupid. Don't file. Wait the 12 months. That's how we're going to defeat tsunami number 2. And in fact, the county has given us, there's a coalition called the Right to Counsel Coalition in LA County. We were fighting for a statutory right to a lawyer before you get evicted. Now we're doing an outreach and education program to send out this message on social media, bus media, train media, texting, those texting programs that harass you during elections. We're going to do that with tenants and earned media. So we want to make sure that landlords are getting this message very clearly. You don't want to be up against lawyers like me with a case you can't win.
Yeah.
You may as well wait the 12 months. And that's the message to landlords. That stops Tsunami 2. Tsunami 3 then comes 12 months later. During that 12-month period, we are launching something that we're calling Access LA for now. But can you imagine recruiting and training 5,000 to 10,000 union leaders, teachers, social service advocates, and social workers, the reverend, the rabbi, and the priest, and all of their staff, tenants' rights movement people, the tenants union. So any organization that works with people or that has members, train their leaders on these COVID rights. It's a very, very limited body of law, and arm them with a 2-page settlement agreement And then we send them out to settle these cases for their own members. We provide them training and supervision by legal services providers. We have regular Zoom meetings to deal with difficult cases, and we charge them with settling 500,000 of these, lowering the number that we have to deal with in a year to 100,000, which is a manageable number. And then I think those will settle also, because in the end, if you file, you're still going to be tied up for a long time. And so ultimately, I think these cases will settle. And, we can't think about it any other way. We can't think about it that people are going to be on the street. That's just not an option. We cannot afford to lose a single unit. We all have to get behind this program or a program like it that gets all of these cases resolved with people staying in their units.
So, just to summarize, you're suggesting people will not get evicted for the next 12 months, and they don't have to pay their rent, and landlords don't have to file an eviction because it just doesn't benefit them either. So it's like it's a win-win situation for both parties.
I'm not suggesting it. I'm saying it.
You're saying it. Okay. This is LA County only, correct?
LA County, and LA County or any jurisdiction in the state that has a 12-month repayment period, which is why the state needs to minimally do a 12-month repayment period. With a 12-month repayment period, we can negotiate, people will get back to work, will stabilize, we'll be able to enter into payment plans. And if you couple that with some of the proposals that we're talking about at the state level with 10-year repayment, then for sure we won't have this tsunami or series of tsunami of evictions that we had been anticipated. And frankly, we're so anxious about at the beginning of all of this.
Yeah, but it seems like there's no mechanisms in place to really, take care of the working class and the poor people of this country, that we have to rely on people like yourselves to get in those gray areas and defend us, because I don't understand why our government can write checks to big corporations, but they just can't cover the bill on our rent, or just, cancel the rent, cancel mortgage payments for a couple of months. But thank you for fighting. It's just a shame that we're getting left in the dark by our government. They don't help us out. Bam, I'm sorry.
Yeah. I mean, it is amazing that they can't cancel this little bit of money, but they've got money to dole out to bail out large corporations, et cetera. Yeah, no, you're totally right. That's what all the federal policy wonk people are trying to prevent. There are these calls that happen every day, local calls, state calls, and national calls.
Yeah.
And I get on the national calls and I get totally overwhelmed because it is such an overwhelming system that we're up against.
Yeah.
But people are fighting at that level also. And I think, imagine this network that I'm talking about putting together, which already somewhat exists in LA County in the Healthy LA Coalition. But imagine all these people working together to do this, and they get empowered by stopping 500,000 evictions, which is no small task. And then from that, who knows? We repeal Costa-Hawkins, which is a law that stops us from getting strong rent control. We repeal the Ellis Act, which is a law that allows landlords to get out of the rental housing market. And since we've done that, then why don't we move on to single payer and to immigration reform and to decommodifying the housing stock, right? There's no stopping us after we stop 500,000 evictions, right?
Awesome. It sets a strong precedent. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so if you recall back in 2008, a lot of these vulture companies would lure people into these forgiveness plans. And you just kind of talked about it today, but are these mechanisms in place today, the same type of plans? And what do you think is on the horizon for homeowners, especially the homeowners that are lower middle class and have maybe one or two home stops, especially people who don't really have or know of any protections, don't really have anything to fall back on if they can't make their mortgage payments?
Yeah, so we're making a little bit of progress on the homeowner front. The HEROES Act, which is not a law yet, it was passed in the House, we're still waiting for the Senate, has a provision for putting COVID-related mortgage non-payments at the end of the loan. So, when I'm 100, but so that would be a solution, but that's only a solution for FHA and Fannie Mae insured loans. It's not a solution for everybody. So we need to work on those kinds of solutions for non-federally insured loans as well. We also need to make sure that we keep people out of the hands of these mortgage brokers that get people in a bad way. I got a request yesterday from a homeowner who requested a loan forbearance and then was kind of in the process of getting the loan forbearance, and then all of a sudden the bank said no and demanded the 2 payments all at once, and she doesn't have it. And now they're offering a refi. Well, a refi might benefit her or it might not. Refis have all kinds of hidden costs in them and consequences, like tax consequences sometimes. And so I referred her to one of the housing services that are legitimate, don't charge, they're nonprofits, and they're in the I almost said business, but they're in the mission of helping homeowners, particularly lower income mom and pop owners, not make those kinds of mistakes.
Yeah.
So there are programs to help homeowners, and we're an eviction defense firm in LA County, and we have been giving advice to people in Eureka, and so we sort of don't have eligibility boundary geography boundaries as long as it's California, because that's where we're licensed. And we're also counseling homeowners and making appropriate referrals so that people don't get into trouble.
Do you know any of these companies, these banks that do that? Because in 2008, my friend Graham Elwood, he lost his house. But like these companies that Steve Mnuchin, who, he was head of the banks, and he had a lot of these mechanisms that he used. Are any of these companies, do you know any of these companies out there? Are they going to get punished? They didn't get punished in
didn't get punished in 2008, and I doubt they'll get punished. But I think the key is to stop them from doing it.
Yeah.
Like, not as rampant as it was then yet. And that's because it's now just starting to happen. Like, as people go 3 months in arrears, that's when we have a problem. So the Healthy LA Coalition has a subcommittee that is dealing with just this. It has a subcommittee that is dealing with renters' rights, and one that's dealing with how we decommodify the housing stock, how we take opportunities. A lot of owners are saying, hey, I'm going to go belly up if my tenants don't pay the rent, and sorry for that. However, here's a fair price for your building. We want to turn it into a limited equity cooperative. We want to turn it into a tenant controlled nonprofit. We want this land trust to buy it so that we can get our housing off of the speculative housing market. We've got all this money going, like Nuri Martinez just announced $100,000 more for rental assistance. It's a drop in the bucket. If you're really going to provide rental assistance to tenants, first wait and see what the state does. Wait and see if we get these plans for the 10-year deferral. Wait and see if we get this mechanism of not being subjected to eviction before you waste this money. And if you've got money to do it, then spend that money not on lining the pockets of landlords. And I'm a landlord, right? But I don't want my pockets lined either. Let's figure out a way that we buy out these distressed landlords so we can decommodify our housing stock. And when I say I'm a landlord, I have 2 tenants. And they're all my friends.
Yeah.
We have 2 units in the back.
What have you witnessed in the lower income areas during this crisis as pertaining to landlords bullying their tenants? And what could people do, the actual steps they can take to protect themselves from abusive landlords like mine?
Yes. So first of all, it's not only happening in low-income neighborhoods. It is happening everywhere. And anywhere where a tenant was unable to pay the rent, we are seeing increased harassment. The gentlest of which is the constant texting, the constant emailing, or coming to knock on the door. The solution to that is block the text, do an auto reply on the email, and put a sign on your door that says, but then you have to make it true, this household is protected by the tenants' rights movement. Landlord, do not knock. Put your request in writing so I can take it to my tenants union and our solidarity attorney and then join a tenants union. Those mechanisms work.
Mm.
Then once
Wow.
a week, you read all the texts and maybe you send one reply, and it's simple. I have complied with the law. Why don't you try doing the same? You look at
Wow.
all the emails, one response. I have complied with the law. Why don't you try doing the same?
Wow.
And then, so that's
Union
the landlord that's not willing to break the law. It goes all the way to constant knocking on the door, making the tenant crazy, right?
Yeah.
So don't get crazy, right? We had a woman accused of throwing water at her landlord through the screen, and the police nearly arrested her. And that kind of makes sense because in COVID, that could be a dangerous assault. So don't lower yourselves to their standards. The more escalated they are, the more de-escalated you are. And then maybe your tenant union does a little protest at their house to let them know that they can be coming to your house.
We got the megaphones out.
And then the third level of escalation, and we've dealt with 23 of these cases since March 19th. That's a huge number. Is the actual lockout or utility termination?
Ooh.
That's legal, and we will be filing lawsuits in the cases we were not able to stop. We just settled the case for $250,000 for an elderly woman that was locked out for 5 hours in the heat.
Wow.
Pre-COVID, and we will be doing more of that. Landlords beware, you do not want to meet us in court. Follow the law. And the tenants union now, every local I hear has a bolt cutter because the police will not enforce. When the police show up, if the tenant's inside, they tell the landlord, sorry, it's a civil matter, even though it is a violation of a penal code, it's a civil matter. You have to file an eviction. If the tenant is outside, has been locked out, they tell the tenant, sorry, it's a civil matter, even though there's a violation of a penal code. We can't let you back in. You have to sue the landlord. So the tenant has to be inside. Now LAPD a couple of weeks ago started telling tenants to cut themselves to break back in. So I think it's a change in LAPD policy. So as a lawyer, I used to tell tenants this, if you're inside, if you're outside, but then I wouldn't go as far as telling them to break in. Like if they didn't, si no agarran la onda, as we say in Spanish, if they don't figure it out themselves, I wasn't saying it. But the tenants union, those people, the LA tenants union, super bold. They started breaking people in, and the LAPD said, hey, what a great idea. And so now that's the policy in LA. It's not the policy in other jurisdictions, but the LA Tenants Union, now every local has bolt cutters. There were 2 lockouts yesterday. Two prevented lockouts yesterday.
So,
Johnny wanted to get the text.
What? Okay, so what is the text to put on the door? Just like a summary of it?
Well, I can't do a summary. We can. So first of all, everybody should be sending an email to info at EDN for evictiondefensenetwork.la and just ask for the COVID-19 tenant survival guide in California. And it's broken down in commonly asked questions, including what to do if my landlord tries to lock me out, what to do if my landlord is harassing me. And then it says step 1, step 2, step 3, and the text is in there. But the text is, this household is protected by the tenants' rights movement. Landlord, do not knock. If you knock, you will be recorded. Put your request in writing so I can take it to my tenants union and our solidarity attorney. And that's what I am, a solidarity attorney. The National Lawyers Guild, which is a progressive bar association in Los Angeles, has recruited lawyers, and almost every tenants union and every local of the LA Tenants Union, they have 13 locals, has their own solidarity attorney. And we are, providing legal support and backup to what the organizers are doing.
Yeah.
So what role has Gavin Newsom played in protecting or betraying poor renters, middle-class renters during the pandemic? And what are the positive and negatives of the things that Gavin has spent federally regarding our funds that were given to the state of California?
So the answer to the first question is almost nothing. He passed an executive order March 20th or 27th that basically said local jurisdictions figure it out, you have authority. That's not a bad thing. It wasn't a bad thing for LA City and LA County, but it was a bad thing for jurisdictions that are not tenant friendly that did nothing. And so the state basically took no responsibility for those tenants. And then the second thing he did is, and this is what everybody called a moratorium. It was not a moratorium. He basically said, and if the landlord files an eviction action because the tenant didn't pay the rent, if the reason the tenant didn't pay it was COVID-19, and if the tenant sends a letter to the landlord within 7 days, then the tenant has 55 days to file an answer instead of 5 days to file an answer. First of all, ridiculous. How's the clerk going to know whether or not the tenant, so the landlord files the complaint, the tenant thinks they have 55 extra days, they don't file an answer, but how's the clerk going to know that they sent that letter, right? Unless the tenant files an answer and tells the clerk, I sent that letter, therefore don't default me. So as a policy, it was ridiculous, but it certainly was not a moratorium. It was just an extension of time to file. And that's really all they've done. And the answer to your second question is very little. In fact, what our federal dollars are being used to address budget deficits caused by deficits in consumer taxes, right? So because everything's shut down, the state has less money. Because the state has less money, nothing brilliantly, wonderfully new is happening. Those federal dollars will be spent on what we already had, and even not that. So he's announced all kinds of budget cuts and closures of programs. Successful people find opportunity in adversity, and our governor is not finding opportunity in adversity. There are opportunities here. There are, in just the housing context, it's an opportunity to shift the entire framework of how we house people and take it off of the speculative market and put it into community control by passing what are called TOPA, Tenant Opportunities to Purchase Act, and COPA, Community Opportunities to Purchase Act. Let's put money into that. Let's put money into land trust. Let's put money into community controlled ownership and then solve this problem. Instead, they're putting money into rent subsidies, right? Yeah. The problem with rent subsidies is it perpetuates the existing system. The existing system does not work, and it lines landlord pockets. And to what end? Nothing at all. So
yeah. So right now, as we are talking, do we need a rent strike for sure? Or do we still have to pump the brakes and wait to see what happens coming down the road?
Well, first of all, the State Bar of California says that a lawyer who represents tenants in evictions cannot promote a rent strike. So I'm not going to say that we need a rent strike, but there is a rent strike. There's been a rent strike since May 1st. In fact, the LA Tenants Union noticed a rent strike for April 1st with their Food First campaign and actively promoted that we're all in a crisis, that all tenants need to look at the possibility that they will not have money for food next month, and that therefore all tenants should not pay the rent. And that is a form of a rent strike. The Alliance of Californians for Community Empowerment and the Housing Now with an exclamation point coalition, which is over 300 organizations statewide, did a rent strike call for May 1st with a specific target on the governor and the state legislature for rent cancellations, hashtag cancel rent, hashtag cancel mortgages. So that rent strike is happening. It is, now most people are striking because they don't have the money. There are a good number of what we call solidarity strikers, people who are making the political decision not to pay the rent. Very much the way that Rosa Parks decided to violate the law and get on a bus and sit in the front in violation of the law, knowing the consequences of her action in order to spark a civil rights movement around desegregation. So these solidarity strikers are making a political statement. I have the rent, however, I am not going to pay it because my neighbor doesn't have the rent and you must cancel rents. They're not huge numbers, I don't think, but they are there and they are important and they are taking a risk. But most people are not paying the rent because they don't have the rent, not because they're actually striking. It is having an impact. We're at least at the bargaining table on these two proposals that are not straight out rent cancellation, but they are a form of rent relief. And if we can get a corresponding rent relief for especially mom and pop owners, where the two or three mortgage payments get tacked on at the end of your mortgage, I think that those are good solutions to our crisis.
Yeah.
Have there been any specific groups that have led the way on the rent strike movement? I mean, I know I've seen the LA Tenants Union have separate strikes. I went to one of them for rent cancellation, but have there been other groups?
Yeah, I would say that the leadership around the rent strike movement in California, locally, it has been the LA Tenants Union. And not only are they doing this call for food, it's hashtag food first is that that call. And they've been out there with the car protests and the social distance protests, and clearly at the leadership of that. And then the Alliance of Californians for Community Empowerment, which is a statewide group, issued this call for a May 1st rent strike. And then Housing Now, which is a coalition of 300 groups, including Tenants Together, which is our other, ACE and Tenants Together are two statewide groups. For lack of a better word, there are two statewide tenant unions. And those two groups are part of Housing Now. And so Housing Now with an exclamation mark, you should go on the website and read the list. It's anybody who's anybody in housing rights, tenants' rights, and unions and progressive churches and quality of life. There's organizations in our community that work on neighborhood quality of life issues like LA Voice and faith-based groups and all kinds of endorsers. It's a very, very good broad coalition. They're leading that rent strike campaign at the state level.
Yeah. I think it's really important to point out, too, is like you just said, a lot of people aren't paying the rent. They're on a rent strike because they can't pay the rent. But it's going to be up to all the people who can afford to pay the rent to join us in solidarity to those who can't pay the rent to really make an impact and let the elites know that we ain't messing around with this one. The HEROES Act is yet to pass the Senate. We talked about this briefly. Is there any relief in that bill that addresses the need for rent cancellation?
Not straight up rent cancellation. First of all, the HEROES Act and the CARES Act, in terms of tenants' rights, only applies to tenants in public housing, tenants in HUD subsidized housing, tenants with Section 8 vouchers, and tenants whose owners have federally insured loans. It's like a very small percentage of our tenant base. And what the CARES Act says is that a tenant in that, like a Section 8 tenant who loses their job, can't be evicted for 30 days after the state of emergency ends. The thing is that it does nothing, because a tenant who's a Section 8 tenant who loses their job needs to go into the housing authority, get recertified, and their rent, since their rent is 30% of their income, goes down. So they shouldn't be getting evicted at all. They should be getting recertified. And it's been a problem. The housing authority is delaying recertifications. I have a meeting actually at 5:00 with a whole bunch of public housing and Section 8 tenants that I met with last week that are they've reported that they have lost a job, but the recertification process isn't happening. And since their rent stays high until the recertification is over, if it takes 3 months for them to be recertified, how do they then make up that money when they are extremely low income and have just lost a job? So we're fixing that problem. So the CARES Act really did nothing for tenants, in my view. For homeowners, there was something about relief, but I'm not even sure. I think it was a forbearance 3 months. It was not enough to get anyone excited.
Yeah, nothing significant.
The HEROES Act does have that put the payments at the end provision. So if that survives, that's good for those homeowners, which are the federally insured homeowners.
Is anybody in Congress that you've seen that has been vocal about protecting renters' rights or having some sort of rent relief?
Representative Omar, I think it's Senate Bill 6515 was the first person to rise to the occasion with a full-on cancel rent, cancel mortgages call. Maxine Waters locally then came up with a bill, and sadly, I'm not in the like at the table there, but there, what I understand is that there's some negotiation going on around reconciling differences and coming up with a bill that doesn't have loopholes. A lot of these bills say things like your rent is canceled, but then you've got to give up your youngest child and promise not to. So there's all these like things you have to give them in order to get the benefit. And I'm just joking about these bills. Neither of them were perfect and neither of them were bad. And advocates are at the table trying to make them better. And that's what happens with lobbying, right? A legislator proposes something, and then all the lobbyists, which is usually a bad term, but we have our lobbyists too. There's a lobby day coming up for housing now, where we will each take legislators and we will put our policy agendas forward. Like, for instance, one of the bills that we're running is a suspend Costa-Hawkins bill. So you all remember Proposition 10, we tried to repeal it and lost. Immediately afterwards, ACE issued a rallying cry for statewide rent control. Housing Now endorsed, and we did a battle between March 15th and September 11th of last year, got a statewide rent control law. It's not the strongest law ever. It's more like a rent stabilization law. It allows for increases of up to 10%, 5% plus consumer price index. And it has eviction protections, one of which you could drive a truck through, and landlords are driving a truck through it and using it to get out of the law. But it is something. It changed my life. Instead of 46 people with $1,500 a month rent increases coming to a clinic, that number dropped significantly after January 1st of 2020. And the people that did come in had, for the most part, protection. So that was a significant step in the right direction. And we need to keep taking steps in those directions. But honestly, I lost track of what the question was.
Yeah. We were talking about who in Congress has made some noise. We mentioned Ilhan Omar and Maxine Waters. The only problem is that they praised the CARES Act when it went through, and they didn't raise against all the money getting kicked up to the top. So I don't know if they're genuine now and really getting us what we need to get. However, we have heard the rumblings from Ilhan.
I mean, the bottom line is they are Democrats. The difference between the Democratic Party and the Republican Party has historically been like this, right?
Yeah.
And well, I will say that with Trump, the Republican Party is way over here, but the Democrats with Bernie kind of moved a little bit this way, but then not, and then yes. And the Democrats, I'm not a Democrat myself. Actually, I might be a Democrat right now because I think I'm a Bernie crap, but I am either green or peace and freedom, depending on my mood. And because Obama deported more people than Trump has. So what are we talking about?
Well, he's
right?
trying. Trump is trying to get close there. I think the COVID's going to slow down his deportations, but he was even sending ICE agents out in the middle of the COVID. So, and that's an interesting point. But Obama did deport more people than Bush, his predecessor. So it is important to point those things out. And like we were just talking about with the CARES Act and whatnot, I really wish we would have somebody come and really put it down and scream and say, listen, we're gonna lead a rent strike if you don't give us the relief and the cancellation that we need.
Well, I was just gonna say, there's like a lot of talk about a general strike movement. We've seen the rent strike movement. What you guys are doing is really powerful as lawyers, as people helping out via the legal mechanisms of it. But there are people protesting and calling for rent cancellation. Do you see any way that there could potentially be a more national type of general strike where this sort of rent cancellation is one of the demands, right? Because we're seeing that there are people that are affected by this, and it's not even political, it's economical for them. It's their job, their house, etc. They can't pay. So it's kind of mobilizing a lot of people that in the face of adversity, like you said, they're using this as an opportunity to maybe fight for something. Do you think there could ever be some sort of movement there? now that we have like the electoral politics kind of like winding down for the presidential election?
So, sadly, less than 10% of the population are activists, right? And that 90% gets catalyzed and motivated when they are affected personally. So, what COVID did is teach about a third of the population about housing insecurity. And so now we've got all these people that are never would have thought that they would join a tenants' rights movement or a movement for healthcare. People, 90% of the population gets motivated to join a movement when they suddenly find themselves facing a $50,000 medical bill. So now they care about medical insurance. When they have a disabled child who's not getting a special education plan, so now they become an activist for special education. When they can't pay the rent and then it gets doubled and then they get hit with an Ellis Act eviction, then they become an activist for tenants' rights. And so what we need is more people to become activists, more people to join the 10%. I think it would be great if there was a general strike day. But for whatever, I think it's also hard to do because people don't like being inconvenienced, and a general strike is an inconvenience.
Yeah.
And also, if it's going to really work, you can't go the day before and the day after to make the expenditure. Like, what a general strike is supposed to do is send a message to electeds that we can shut down the economic system. Well, you don't shut down the economic system if you stock up the day before or over by the day after. You have to really not spend that money. But I'm all for it. If someone calls it, I'll organize around it.
You guys heard it.
Jonny C., you got anything else? All right, Elena, thank you so much. We have it, ladies and gentlemen. There it is. The CONVO Couches resident rental and eviction specialist. Elena Popp said it right here. Elena, thank you so much for joining us. We really do appreciate it. I can't wait to clip up this interview right here and send it to my bullying landlord to let her know that who's in my corner and she better back off. You got anything else to tell us, Elena, where we can find you? Anything exciting coming up?
So we have today's Thursday, right? No, tomorrow's Thursday.
Yes.
I think what we should do is, if everyone gets if you send an email to info@edn.la, you can get the survival guide. And we will also send you the link information we have clinics on Thursday and on Saturday every week. The Thursday one is co-sponsored with the National Lawyers Guild, and the Saturday with the Pasadena Tenants Union. Okay. So if you want the links to that, for now, send an email to askanattorney@edn.la. Actually, if you have a legal problem, ask an attorney at edn.la. If you just want the renter guide and the information for the clinics, it's info@edn.la.
You can send that to my email address too as well. I need one of those.
Thank you so much, Elena. We appreciate you.
We do.
You. Valuable.
You're great. For Pasta Jardula,
Fiorella,
Jonny Sue and the ones and twos, and Elena Popp in the house.
CONVO out. Bye, guys.
Bye. Thank you.
Peace.